That short trip was one of many small-scale tests the company has put on over the years, all of which speak to the commercial viability of tiny, driverless buses. I can't imagine those tests were any more exciting. The P1 isn't ready for roads just yet, but it's a fascinating taste of what the future of urban transit could look like: simple, straightforward, and easy to accept. For a company like Coast, that's the best kind of boring. Coincidentally, the shuttle itself doesn't look like much, either. It's basically a big, self-enclosed golf cart with massive tinted windows. Since the shuttle scoots around bidirectionally, there's no discernible front or back, it's the same all the way around. Meanwhile, a white, ring-like bench hugs the interior walls, and a pair of roof-mounted grab rails sit directly across from a display for route information. Coast says up to 20 people can fit inside, assuming some people choose to stand, but I wouldn't want to ride one of these things with more than 10 or 12 people inside. There are no seat belts, either, which works out just fine since each shuttle is meant to move between 15 to 20 mph at most. Those low speeds also help keep the shuttle's runtime as high as possible. Lefebvre says each one can run between 10 and 12 hours on a single charge, and that they charge on inductive panels the shuttles park on at the end of the day. The interior starts to feel cramped quickly. Chris Velasco/Engadget right off the bat, the company's self-driving shuttles seem like a better fit for closed systems, think sprawling office parks, airports, theme parks, and school campuses. Aside from the occasional stray pedestrians, there's little to throw one of these shuttles for a loop. Coast advisor Rick Baker, who served for nearly 10 years as mayor of St. Petersburg, Florida, says the company is in talks with at least one of each. When it comes to deploying Coast in a city like New York, things get a little harder. For one, Coast isn't just going to sell these driverless shuttles to cities, the company has to operate and maintain the fleet itself, a move that'll probably require lengthy contract negotiations with local governments. There's also the question of what paths these shuttles would use to navigate around New York. The city has had a grid of priority lanes for buses for decades, and it would make sense for shuttles to use those instead of driver-accessible lanes. That said, I'd be willing to bet that anyone who has ever driven in New York City has dipped into a bus lane for a few blocks, and someone cutting off a tiny driverless bus that doesn't have seat belts might not end well. Coast also needs redundancies to rely on in case one of its shuttle's camera arrays can't see a traffic light. That would require the city to install tiny transmitters on lights in lanes where the shuttles would operate. These transmitters will become more common as cities continue to grow smarter, but they're far from ubiquitous. And as it stands, Coast hasn't cooked up a way for people to actually pay for rides. Baker says this is currently in the works, too.